Good morning and namaste to all of you. Let's start our Gita class, Saturday's Gita class, with some mantras where we are praying to Lord Krishna and thanking him for this wonderful knowledge. Om Parthaye Pratibodhitam Bhagavata Narayan Swayam Vyasen Gratitam Puran Munina Madhye Mahabharatam Advaitamritvarshini Bhagavati Mashtadashadhyayani Ambutva Manusandhami Bhagavad Gita Bhavadveshani Namo Astute Vyas Vishal Buddhe Full Arvind Ayat Patra Netar Yentavya Bharat Tail Purnaha Prajvalito Gyanmaya Pradipaha प्रपन्न पारिजाताये तोत्र वेत्र एक पानये ज्ञान मुद्राये कृष्णाये गीता अमृत दुहे नमः सर्वोपनिषदो गावो दोगदा गोपाल नंदना पार्थो वत्सा सुधीर भोगता दुग्धम गीता अमृतम महत् वसुदेव सुतम देवम कंस चानूरमर्दनम देवकी परमानंदम कृष्णम वंदे जगद्गुरुम भीष्म द्रोण तटा जयद्रथ चला गांधार नीलोत्पला शल्ये ग्राहवती कृपेन वाहनी कर्णेन वेलाकुला अश्वत्थाम विकर्ण घोरमकरा दुर्योधन अवर्तनी सो तीर ना खलु पांडवई रन्नदी कवर्तका केशवा पाराशरे वत्सरोजमलम गीता अर्कंधोटकम नानाख्यानक केसरम हरि कथा संबोधन अबोधितम लोके सज्जन शकपदय रह पे पिये मानम मुदा भूयाद भारत पंकजम कलिमल प्रध्वंसी न श्रेयसे मूकं करोति वाचालम पंगुम लंघ्यते गिरम यत्कृपातमहं वंदे परमानंद माधवम यम ब्रह्म वरुण इंद्र रुद्र मरुतः स्तुन्वन्ति दिव्ये स्तवे वेदै सांगपदक्रमोपनिषदे गायन्ति यम सामगा ध्यानवस्ते तद्गतेन मनसा पश्यन्ति यम योगिनो यस्यन्तं न विदुसुर असुर गणा देवाय तस्मै नमः. So chapter 13, Kshetrajna Vibhaga Yoga. This is one of the most famous chapters in Bhagavad Gita. Why? Because it gives us a direct explanation of the subject in us, which is called the self or the soul, and also the objects of the world also. So we have an exhaustive exposition of how to meditate directly upon the formless spirit when we get detached from these forms. The soul functioning through matter or the layers of matter is the living organism. Man unrest of this matter is the eternal formless spirit or soul. So to undress, we got to learn what is the process. And the process of undressing this matter layers is the process of meditation. But exactly how do we do it? Because right now we are so involved in the Prakriti, in the matter layers. Can we draw ourselves from ourselves? Because we relate with our body, we relate with our mind and intellect. Is it possible to draw ourselves from ourselves and seek our identity with the infinite? Is it possible? This is what is explained in this chapter. Lord Krishna called these layers of matter and even the perceived world of the objects together as the field. And that's what Kshetra means, the field. And the supreme consciousness which illuminates this is called the knower of the field, Kshetrajna. So one is a knower only as long as one is in the field of knowable. It's almost like a driver is one who's driving. A rider is one who's riding a horse. A swimmer is one who's swimming at the moment. So off the steering wheel, off the saddle, or away from the waters, the driver, the rider, the swimmer are just three individuals. So that's why while functioning in a given field, the subject gathers to itself a certain special status, depending upon the nature of the field or the type of the functions performed by him therein. So the pure consciousness, perceiving the world of polarity through its own conditionings, becomes the knower of the field. So there's a field, it is a kshetra, and more of the field, that is the Kshetrajna. And this knower becomes to experience joys and sorrows, successes and failures, peace and agitation, jealousies, fear, or million other wrecking storms and upheavals. This knower of the field. But if through discrimination, the field and its knower are known separately, how? Through meditation. That this is the field, this is the knower of the field, we can detach ourselves from this matter equipment and get away from this field also. And then all the sorrows we are feeling right now, we can see that the sorrows belong to only the field, not to the knower. When we are so intermingled, we think we are feeling it. But actually, there is no pain or sorrow or sadness or depression in the knower of the field. So knowledge in a field of known things and happenings become the knower, which suffers the imperfections of the known, and the knower minus the field of the known becomes pure knowledge, becomes perfect. This chapter, if you try to learn it slowly, it really opens up enough secret windows onto the vast amphitheater of spiritual insight within ourselves. We can see that it's all about us, not about anybody else. So let's start with Arjun's question. In some of the books, Arjun's question is not mentioned. But Arjun's question, if we can remember, then the whole chapter becomes more clear to us. He says Prakriti and Purush. Prakriti is the matter, Purush is the spirit. Also the Kshetra, the field, and the Kshetrajna, the knower of the field. Knowledge, that is a jnana, and that which ought to be known. These I wish to learn. So these are technical terms which have been used earlier, some of them at least, and Arjun wants to know what is the meaning. So the soul in itself has no expression except when it plays through the Prakriti, through the matter. So almost like you can understand electricity in itself cannot manifest as light. But when it wets the bulb, it is manifested as light. Or if it wets a heater, We see it as a heat. All these are the themes that are to be discussed in this chapter. Listen how the Lord answers all these questions categorically. In your books, this is the first verse. Lord Krishna says, the body, because Arjun and we are also familiar with this body. The body of Konte is called the Kshetra, the field. And he who knows it is called the knower of the field, Kshetrajna. By those who know them, that means the sages. It's not just a theoretical knowing, it's experientially knowing. So the point over here is that we have already discussed this philosophy in chapter 7 and chapter 8. But then the thread of the discussion was broken up by Arjun's questions. And that's why Lord Krishna was answering those questions in the following chapters. But in a living person, philosophically, if we view it, there are two aspects. The inert, insentient matter layers, and the sentient and the vital consciousness. These are the two things in us. And these two aspects are defined in this first verse. Kshetra and Kshetrajna. The equipment through which life passes, when the individuality is expressed, that's what's defined here by Lord Krishna as the Kshetra, the field. And then in the next verse, he says, know me as the knower of the field in all the fields. So I know my field, you know your field, but God knows all the fields. So know me as the knower of the field in all the fields. So Bharat. Bharat is another name he is using for Arjun. Knowledge of the field, as also of the knower of the field, is considered by me to be my knowledge. Because Arjun wanted to know what knowledge is. He said, this is the real knowledge. So in other words, he says, I am the knower of a field in all the fields. If in all fields the knower is one, then all these difference we see is only in the bodies, or you can say the matter. That's where the polarity is. Because the life that presides over them is one everywhere. God is one. What that field is, of what nature it is, what are its modifications, where it is, and also who he is, what his powers are, Lord Krishna says, hear from me in brief. So answer to all these questions. Of what nature means, what are its properties? Okay. Where is what? That means what are the byproducts when it changes its form? And what is its origin? Who is he, the knowing principle in the field? And what are his powers of perception, feelings, and thoughts? See, if we are bondaged in this Prakriti, it's our duty to know how did we get bondaged? What is it that we are bondaged in? So that means at least a working knowledge of this bondage we need to know. Only then we can plan, and only then we can have a strategy to get out of this too. Lord Krishna says in the next verse, in your books it will be verse number 4, Rishis have sung about the field and the knower of the field. In many ways, in various distinctive chants, and also in suggestive words, indicative of Brahma, full of reason and decision. So Lord Krishna is saying the explanation that are to follow, it's not just an idle talk or even a intellectual manifestations. So he's assuring Arjun and to us also, it is a very healthy restatement of what has been sung by the rishis in many ways in different hymns in the Vedas. And we know Vedas are the authority, highest authority about this subject matter. And why should we so readily accept these statements of the rishis in the Vedas or in the Upanishads? Because this truth, when it is declared with the logical reasoning and conclusions, we got to accept it. Our intellect accepts it immediately. Sure, some people will always doubt, but the intellectual student, by the sheer force of its appeal, will accept it. It will make sense. So now Arjun is prepared to listen. So Lord Krishna got his attention, and Lord says, the great elements, the egoism, intellect, and also the unmanifested, the 10 senses, the one mind, and the 5 objects of the senses. Desire, hatred, pleasure, pain. Aggregate body, intelligence, fortitude. This Kshetra has been briefly described with its modifications. So these 2 verses, verse 5 and 6, enumerate the various items together constitute the field. Because this is what Lord Krishna said in the very first verse, idam shariram, this body. So this is the enumeration. He's just further elaborating on this body. Mahabhut. Mahabhut means 5. Space, air, fire, water, and earth. These are called Mahabhut, 5 great elements. Egoism, ahankar, the sense of I amness, myness. Buddhi, the intellect. That is a determining faculty in us. Unmanifest, the avyakta. That means all the vasanas, all the sanskars, impressions which were left over in the subtle body as a result of the previous egocentric existence. Mool Prakriti. Mool Prakriti is the root of this Prakriti, unmanifested Prakriti. 10 senses. We know these 5 sense organs or organs of perception and 5 sense organs of actions. In Hindi, we call it Karmendriya and Gyanendriya. And Ekam, that means the mind. So these 24 factors enumerated are the famous 24 tattva of Sankhya philosophy. So Kshetra includes even their modifications. That's why in the following verse he said desire, hatred, pleasure, pain, assemblage of the body, intelligence, steadfastness, all of this is part of the field. So in other words, not only the gross body, mind and the intellect, but even the perceptions experienced through them. The world of objects, the emotions and thoughts are also indicated in this field. Remember that. Okay, the Kshetra. The following section, which is like a section has together. So like a 5 consecutive verses together. They list the 20 qualities indicating the knower, the Kshetrajna. If you want to know exactly, in verse number 12, he indicates this again. But first, let's look at these 5 verses. These are almost like a mental and intellectual attributes, moral attitudes, ethical principles, which have been prescribed as a prerequisite to know yourself. So they are humility, unpretentiousness, non-injury, forgiveness, uprightness. Uprightness means straightforwardness. Service to the teacher, purity, steadfastness, self-control. I mean, you can see that how these are the moral qualities, or you can even call it ascetic practices. They are all conducive to spiritual awakening. In next verse, he says, indifference to the objects of the senses, and also absence of egoism, perception or reflection upon evil in birth, old age, sickness, and pain. Non-attachment, non-identification of self with the son, wife, home, and the rest. And constant even-mindedness on the attainment of the desirable and the undesirable. So there got to be right channeling of our discovered energy, because normally what happens through all these, we just dissipate our energy. So when we have these qualities, we have that energy conserved. And what do we do with this energy? He says in verse number 10, unswerving devotion unto me by the yoga of non-separation, resorting to solitary places, distaste for the society of man. Mei cha ananya yogena bhakti avyabhicharane vivikt desh se vitvam arti jana samsade. So constancy in self-knowledge, perception of the end of true knowledge. This is declared to be knowledge. And what is opposed to it is ignorance. So that means once we have these qualities cultivated, we have done the sadhana, constancy in self-knowledge. Self-knowledge means you will know who you are. Perception of the end of a true knowledge. So that means this is with the help of the knowledge, this is where we end. He says this is declared to be knowledge. Anything opposite of this is ignorance. So that means the end should be kept in vision. And end is the moksha, liberation from all our imperfections, all our limitations. That is the end. That is what we have to strive for. And what is that which has to be known by the knowledge? Let's look at how he answers that in next verse, verse number 12. He says, I will declare that which has to be known, knowing which one attains to immortality. The beginningless supreme Brahm, called neither being nor being. This is what we have to know. Neither Sat nor Asat. Because the supreme or the Brahm cannot be characterized either positively or negatively. Because Sat and Asat, they both are the judgments of the human mind and intellect. The consciousness that illumines these judgments is the self. Sat and Asat are two types of thought waves. And self or the soul or the God or the Brahma illumines them both. Describing the all-pervading self-conscious principle, we have a following verse number 13. He says, with hands and feet everywhere, with eyes, heads, and mouths everywhere, with ears everywhere, he exists in the world, enveloping all. And you remember in Vishwa Rup Darshan chapter, that's what Arjun saw. Thousands and thousands of eyes and the ears and the mouths and the noses, countless. So this is what Lord Krishna is saying. Sarvataha pani padam tat sarvata akshi shiro mukham sarvata shruti mat loke sarvam avritya tishtati. That's how he resides. And continuing the description of the eternal truth, the Lord says, shining by the functions of all the senses, yet without the senses. So he can see without the eyes, he can hear without the ears, unattached, yet supporting all, devoid of qualities, yet their experiencer. Not only this, but the self functioning in an individual is the one self in all. He says, without and within all beings, the unmoving and also the moving, because of its subtlety, unknowable and near and far away, is that. It's the nearest to near and farthest of far. Because he's all pervasive. The all pervasiveness of the principle of consciousness is indicated here. That's how the Upanishads talk also. The Brahman which can be realized within ourselves as self is one and the same in all. And revels as the self in all. And that is explained in the verse number 16 in your books. He says, and undivided. Yet he exists as if divided in beings. That's why we say that my Atma and your Atma. It seems divided, but it's not divided. That is to be known as the supporter of beings. He devours and he generates. See, just like earth is the supporter of all the plants. It creates and it devours them all. Or you can look at the ocean as an example. Ocean is the supporter of all the waves. Waves are born from the ocean. They are devoured by the same ocean. You all have seen it. That Brahm, the light of all lights, is said to be beyond darkness. It is knowledge, the object of knowledge, seated in the hearts of all, to be reached by knowledge. So Brahm, the illuminator in all, is the one consciousness by which everything is known intellectually, realized intuitively, and experienced spiritually. In this verse number 17, in the second line, there's an indication of the spirit or the soul. Knowledge, which is jnanam, that which is to be known, gyayam, and that which is to be reached by knowledge, jnanagamyam. So jnanam, gyayam, jnanagamyam, hridi sarvasya tishthidam. So it's all inside us, all of us. Then he says, thus the field as well as the knowledge and the knowable have been briefly stated. Knowing this, my devotee enters into my being. So the field described above started out with the great elements, ending with the fortitude, knowledge comprising the moral and the ethical rules, where we are told to have a right relationship with the world, starting with humility, ending with the perception of the end of knowledge, and the knowable has been described. But now the question is, who among the seekers is really fit for this great knowledge? He says the devotees alone are fit for my state. Devotees. In next verse, he says, know you that Prakriti, the matter, and the spirit, which is the Purusha, are both beginningless. And know also that all modifications and qualities are born of Prakriti. So understand this matter and the spirit or the soul are two aspects of the Lord, the Ishwar. So it is the interplay that project creation, interplay between these two, the soul and the Prakriti. So creation is from there, preservation is from there, and ultimately dissolution is from there too. And what then are these forms and qualities which are described here as born of the Prakriti? In verse number 20, he says, in the production of the effect and the cause, the Prakriti is said to be the cause. So in the production, in the creation, Prakriti is said to be the cause. In the experience of pleasure and pain, Purush is said to be the cause, the soul. So that which perceives the entire world of objects and their reactions upon the ego is the self. So Purush is explained here as the cause for the experiences in life. Purush is the cause for the sansar. So again, Purush means the soul, the self. And what is this sansar due to? This creation due to what? He says the Purush seated in Prakriti experiences the qualities born of Prakriti. Attachment to the qualities is the cause of his birth in good and evil wombs. So that means this soul, when it identifies itself with the Prakriti, the matter, becomes the experiencer. He experiences the qualities born of the Prakriti. And we know the qualities, the Satvikta, Rajsikta, Tamsikta. So there's a sensation arising out of the matter envelopment, the Prakriti. And what are the senses? The pleasure, pain, heat, cold, success or failure. So the destinies of the matter becomes the tragic experiences of the soul. And at this level, we call this soul a Jivatma, when it experiences it. Because these experiences are not part of the Atma, but because the Atma unnecessarily makes an unhealthy contact. That's why the rishis, they distinguish this into Jivatma, individualized soul. Because its own identifications with the realm of joy or the sorrow. The rediscovery of the self and the awakening to our spiritual nature will be through the path of number one, detachment from the field, detachment from the Kshetra, and number two, experience of the real knowledge, the Gyan. So, in a philosophical terminology, that means Vairagya and Vivek. These are the means for regaining the God in ourselves. The right knowledge and detachment from what is not real. Lord continues to teach us directly that what knowledge is. In verse number 22, he says, the Supreme Purush in this body is also called the spectator, the permitter, the supporter, the enjoyer, the great Lord, and the Supreme Self. Pretty deep verse, because the same soul, depending upon how much Vairagya is there, how much Vivek is there, is given a different name. Updrashta, Anumanta, Bharta, Bhogta, Maheshwar, Paramatma iti cha apiyukta, dehe asmin purusha para. Even though it is one, it is same, but depending upon how far away we are from the knowledge, it's almost like how far that mountain is. A person who's closer to the mountain can see mountain is so beautiful and so magnificent and so big. And if you are far away from that mountain, you can say that, no, it's just a small hill, I can cross it quickly. Or the moon in the bucket is the reflected moon. And a little child will think that, no, this is a moon. But a little mature person will know, it is just a reflection of the moon. The real moon is up there far away. How does the one who knows the higher self, unconditioned by the field, react in life? Because that question comes to us too. How do we recognize a person? Or how do we reach there? What qualities we need to cultivate? Lord Krishna says in verse number 23, he who knows the Purush and Prakriti together with the qualities, in whatsoever condition he may be, is not born again. So that means he who has realized in himself that what is the matter or what is the Prakriti and what is the spirit, the soul. How the spirit, deluded by its own preoccupations, get identified with the matter and behaves as a knower of the field. And the mysteries of the gunas, the qualities. Because under the influence of these gunas, we function either as a man of wisdom or a man of ignorance. So to know a thing, we must stand apart from it. So that's why the soul is called a witness. Soul is looking at it, looking at the body, looking at the mind, looking at the intellect, looking at the ego. So even in this assemblage, know who is watching and what is being watched. Not just the outer world only, but in us also. Then he says, beautiful verse, verse number 24, because we see that several paths to this knowledge, the self-knowledge, are mentioned here. Our rishis, they recognized that we all are sure we are walking towards the same truth, but we are at a different level. Some people are physically active, some people are mentally active, some people are intellectual, intuitively, they are sharp. So that's why in this verse number 24 in your books, it says, some by meditation, behold the self in the self by the self. So that means some people can sit and meditate for hours. They can see the distinction. Others by the yoga of knowledge. That means they need to study little. Go through the scriptures. Sit at the feet of the Guru. Try to understand. And others by Karam Yoga. Karam Yoga is where we learned that in the first section of Bhagavad Gita. Karam Yoga. When we do our duties faithfully, skillfully, lovingly, it becomes a Karam Yoga. So each path is the fittest for the one who's walking it. No path can be said to be nobler than the other. The difference between the various seekers is the difference in their mental equanimity and intellectual equipoise. But how about a person who can't walk on these paths? Is there anything for that person? That means a person who is steeped in tamsikta, or a person with a mental and intellectual inertia? Are they lost forever? No. Lord Krishna said, others also, not knowing this worship, having heard of it from others, they too cross beyond death if they would regard what they have heard as their supreme refuge. So that means if they follow somebody, try to cultivate these qualities slowly, they will also reach. Because we know that some people are not capable of meditation, and they don't have the intellectual capacity to follow the logical thought from the scriptures, or even they really don't understand how to follow the path of action either. So if they constantly worship the Lord as they have been instructed by the teacher, the guru, they can transcend the finite life of polarity. Through these various paths available, what exactly is the ultimate goal to be realized? Because if we do all this hard work, just like when we go to the college, to the schools, go to work, we always back up. A seeker wants to know, what will I get? Lord Krishna says, whenever any being is born, the unmoving or the moving, know you, O best of the Bharats, that it is from the union between the field and the knower of the field. So this self, which is the substratum of a given Purush and Prakriti, is itself the one self everywhere. This is what a devotee will experience, the oneness. He sees who sees the Supreme Lord existing equally in all beings. The unperishing within the perishing. So a person who is doing the sadhana, any one of the ways a person is walking will become capable of recognizing the Supreme Lord who revels everywhere as the pure spirit in all names and forms. Indeed, he who sees the same Lord everywhere equally dwelling destroys not the self by the self, therefore he goes to the highest goal. So this is the ultimate goal also, supreme goal. And a person by walking on these paths will reach that ultimate goal. He sees who sees that all actions are performed by Prakriti alone and that the self is actionless. This will be experienced. I don't do anything. The real I. The Prakriti portion or the Kshetra in me is doing it, not the Kshetrajna. So while explaining the self as the source of all being, the Lord indicates the state of a person who can declare that he has all full experience of the infinite one. So that means experientially this person will know. When he sees the whole variety of beings as resting in the one and spreading forth from that one alone, he then becomes Brahma. So that means the complete understanding of life can arise at once. You'll understand how from the self, the endless universes, the names and the forms rise up and they spread into this universe. Being without beginning, being devoid of qualities, the supreme self, the imperishable, though dwelling in the body, neither acts nor is tainted. So this person will experience this. As the all-pervading Akash, the ether, is not tainted because of its subtlety, so too the self seated everywhere in the body is not tainted. So the grosser cannot taint the subtler. Okay? Akash is the subtlest of the 5 elements. It cannot be tainted. And the Atma is subtler than any of these, so can never be tainted. So the supreme self is the subtler than that. It cannot be contaminated. And what exactly is the spirit's function in the body? Verse number 3 says, just as the one sun illumines the whole world, so also the Lord of the field, Paramatma, illumines the whole field. So this is the function of the Atma. Even we say that Atma is here, but it illumines the whole field, just like a sun up there illumines everything here. So this doctrine of the field and the knower of the field, both playing in the supreme, has been discussed in this chapter. And let's look at the last verse, because this whole chapter is concluded in this last verse. They who, with their eye of wisdom, come to know the distinction between the field and the knower of the field, and of the liberation from the prakriti of the being, go to the Supreme. Okay, so he explained fully what the Kshetra is, the field. He explained in order to realize the Kshetrajna, the knower of the field, what do we need to do? What kind of qualities we need to cultivate? So over here, Lord Krishna is directly advocating that we got to cultivate this discrimination. We got to learn how to successfully meditate. We got to shape up our behavior and relationships among the field, the knower of the field, and the Supreme Self in himself. And this all can be done only with a well-integrated instrument. That means a combination of a fully developed head and heart. So that means the devotion has to be there too. That is the heart. To rediscover pure awareness and to realize that it is the self, which is just dressed up as a field. So that means this body is just dressed up. But over here, our job is to know who we truly are. That is the knowledge. So sure, we went through this chapter. It's a very deep chapter, deep philosophy. But if you string all these verses and try to understand what we already learned before, then it becomes a little easier. Okay, so let's end it here. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadai Purnameva Visheshyate. Om Shanti 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 Om. Thank you very much.